back onto the front row here. Keep you out of the splash zone, though. Okay, Tosin has handouts, so if he hasn't already gotten you one, he'll come around and just flag him down if you still need one. Talking about Ezekiel 2 and 3 tonight, and chapter 2 is very short, and I'm not even sure why there's a chapter break, honestly, between chapters 2 and 3. But it's still 30-some-odd verses, and so it'll be quite a bit to cover and talk about, so we'll try to get moving here. Let's remind ourselves of the historical context and therefore the main emphasis or message of the book of Ezekiel. In chapter 1 and verse 2, we have this reference to the exile of King Jehoiachin, and that was the same moment in time in which Ezekiel himself was taken as an exile into Babylon. Now, do you remember which of the three phases of captivity was that one? The second one, okay? And that's significant because the first wave of captivity, which we read about in the book of Daniel, was really hardly a captivity. It was just very few people taken off. The very top of society was skimmed off to take to Babylon, people like Daniel. But the second captivity is much more significant. That's when we would say Jerusalem is, outright conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, and in his show of force, he removes a whole bunch of people from Jerusalem and takes them into Babylon. So we've said here that Jerusalem is bowed in 598, 597. And that's the date, or almost the date, given at the beginning of the book. A few years later, after that big exile that Ezekiel is a part of, Ezekiel is called to be a prophet. And so then he spends the first 24 chapters of the book of Ezekiel talking about judgment, particularly judgment on Judah and Jerusalem. And so the question that we've asked and that we want to keep in mind as we read is, if Jerusalem's already been brought low, God has already brought in Nebuchadnezzar to take a whole bunch of people captive, clearly a humbling experience for Jerusalem, why do we still need 24 chapters of Ezekiel saying, God's judgment is upon you, coming upon you, you're in sin, all this kind of stuff? Why is that needed if Jerusalem's already been brought to its knees? Okay, it's not the final one. And so clarify a little bit for us, Jordan. Do you mean like later on in history with other people there'll be judgments, or do you mean this is not the final judgment for Jerusalem?
I would argue both.
Okay. And that's basically the answer, is that Jerusalem has been brought to her knees, but there is still more judgment to come. What do the people that Ezekiel is going to be talking to, what do they think is going to happen? Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. The people think, yeah, we've been brought to our knees, we'll get over this soon enough. It's just a short little deal, and we'll be back on our feet, and surely God will not allow anything worse to happen to us. Okay? The prophets like Ezekiel in Babylon and Jeremiah, remember, in Judah, is saying the same thing to the people there. No, you still don't get it. You still don't get it. You're still hard-headed and hard-hearted. You're still not repenting and truly turning to God. And so there is, as Jordan said, more judgment coming. Okay? So the first 24 chapters is that message. Judgment is coming because of your rebellion and your unfaithfulness. About halfway through the book, we see that things have been taken to the next level in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar besieges the city in chapter 24, verse 1, which is a significant moment. It means now they're on the doorstep, literally. Okay? At that point, we have a little bit of an interlude, and for 7 or 8 chapters, as is common in the prophets, there will be oracles of judgment, not for Judah, but for the surrounding nations, particularly in this book, Tyre and Egypt. But then we hear news in chapter 33 that it's happened. Okay, Jerusalem has been totally broken, burned, temple destroyed, burned to the ground, and laid waste. Okay, that's what the prophets have been trying to tell them was going to happen. Finally, it happens, and the rest of the people are taken away into captivity. Okay, so then at that point, once Jerusalem has been crushed and destroyed, then what's the message? Anybody remember? It's hope for the rest of the book. Now that that has come to pass, Ezekiel looks to the future, and there is hope for Israel's future. So that's the basic scope and structure of the book. We're at the very beginning here. And really, before we get to the judgment, Ezekiel has to be sent into action. So the first 3 chapters of the book are the call of Ezekiel, beginning in chapter 1, which we saw on Sunday, with this glorious vision that he saw of God's royal throne chariot approaching. And then here in chapters 2 and 3, where God will actually speak to Ezekiel. So, what do we want to accomplish tonight? We want to, before you leave, be able to describe the work that God is calling Ezekiel to. What's that work going to be like? How's it going to go? We hope by the end of class that you can explain this image of the watchman. That's a huge thing in Ezekiel. It'll be repeated multiple times throughout the book. The watchman. Handful of things you remember from Ezekiel, this should be one of them. What does that mean, and how does it relate to Ezekiel? And then we do, hopefully by the end, also want to have a discussion about what does this mean for us? Are there connections that we can make to our call? We talked about this. Are we prophets? Are we not prophets? There's some parallels we can draw from Ezekiel's work to our work, and we want to talk about that before we're done tonight. Okay, but first, let's read chapters 2 and 3 in their entirety of the book of Ezekiel, and I'd encourage you to follow along. Ezekiel chapter 2 and verse 1. Then he said to me, that is God, Son of man, stand on your feet that I may speak with you. As he spoke to me, the Spirit entered me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. Then he said to me, Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to a rebellious people who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. I am sending you to them who are stubborn and obstinate children. And you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. As for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, neither fear them nor fear their words, though thistles and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Neither fear their words nor be dismayed at their presence, for they are a rebellious house. But you shall speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious. Now you, son of man, listen to what I'm speaking to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I'm giving you. Then I looked, and behold, a hand was extended to me, and lo, a scroll was in it. When he spread it out before me, it was written on the front and back, and written on it were lamentations, mourning, and woe. Chapter 3. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat what you find. Eat this scroll, and go, speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he fed me the scroll. He said to me, Son of man, feed your stomach and fill your body with this scroll which I am giving you. Then I ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth. Then he said to me, Son of man, go to the house of Israel and speak with my words to them. For you are not being sent to a people of unintelligible speech or difficult language, but to the house of Israel, nor to many peoples of unintelligible speech or difficult language, whose words you cannot understand, but I have sent you to them who should listen to you. Yet the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, since they are not willing to listen to me. Surely the whole house of Israel is stubborn and obstinate. Behold, I have made your face as hard as their faces, and your forehead as hard as their foreheads. Like emery, harder than flint, I have made your forehead. Do not be afraid of them or be dismayed before them, though they are a rebellious house. Moreover, he said to me, Son of man, take into your heart all my words which I will speak to you, and listen closely. Go to the exiles, to the sons of your people, and speak to them and tell them whether they listen or not. Thus says the Lord God. Verse 12, then the Spirit lifted me up, and I heard a great rumbling behind me. Blessed be the glory of the Lord in his place. And I heard the sound of the wings of the living beings touching one another, and the sound of the wheels beside them, even a great rumbling sound. So the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went embittered in the rage of my spirit, and the hand of the Lord was strong on me. Then I came to the exiles who lived beside the river Kabar at Tel Abib, and I sat there 7 days, where they were living, causing consternation among them. At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, I have appointed you a watchman to the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you will surely die, and you do not warn him or speak out to warn the wicked from his wicked way that he may live, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. Yet if you have warned the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered yourself. Again, when a righteous man turns away from his righteousness and commits iniquity, I place an obstacle before him, he will die. Since you have not warned him, he shall die in his sin, and his righteous deeds which he has done shall not be remembered, but his blood I will require at your hand. However, if you have warned the righteous man that the righteous should not sin, and he does sin, he shall surely live because he took warning, and you have delivered yourself. The hand of the Lord was on me there, and he said to me, Get up, go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So I got up and went out to the plain, and behold, the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory which I saw by the river Kabar, and I fell on my face. The Spirit then entered me and made me stand on my feet, and he spoke with me and said to me, Go, shut yourself up in your house. As for you, son of man, they will put ropes on you and bind you with them, so that you cannot go out among them. Moreover, I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth, so that you will be mute, and cannot be a man who rebukes them, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you will say to them, Thus says the Lord God, He who hears, let him hear. He who refuses, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house. Okay, as is on your worksheet, I want to begin with some discussion. So, as we've done before, take some time to discuss with the people near you for a few minutes, and then we'll give you an opportunity to share out. But from your reading of chapters 2 and 3 of Ezekiel, this is what I want you to discuss with those around you. What's Ezekiel's goal? We think in those terms, right? Goals. How would you measure Ezekiel's success as a prophet? Or I should say, what is the true measure of his success? Talk about that amongst yourselves. What's Ezekiel's goal as God lays out for him in these 2 chapters? Talk for a few minutes. All right, gave you a couple minutes. Share out. What did you hear? Maybe what did you say that was brilliant? And you want to share with the rest of the class. What's Ezekiel's goal? What's his measure of success? Granny says to do what God told him to do. What else would you say? To say what God told him to say. To not be rebellious, like the people. Right? Maybe you brought this up in your own discussion. I thought about phrasing it this way or doing both. Did you notice what is not Ezekiel's goal? What is not the measure of success that God gives Ezekiel? How many people respond? The people turn around. Notice none of that is his goal. That is not the measure of his success. What's the measure of his success? Well, what you said. Say that again. Notice, it'll come up again later, but let's just notice it now. Verse 5. So, put both of these two things together. What's been said is exactly right. His goal is to say what God tells him to say, do what God tells him to do, to submit to God and not be rebellious, right? If Ezekiel does that, he's going to be fine, right? He will have accomplished what God gave him to accomplish, okay? But notice verse 5, the end result for the people, they're not going to listen, but by the end of this, they will know something. What will they know? That a prophet has been among them. That, you could say, is Ezekiel's goal, okay? To speak the words God gave him to speak so that by the end of his ministry, everyone, even though they've not listened, will know a prophet of God has been here and has been among us, okay? Those kinds of things, that's what Ezekiel's goal is, and not how many people he converts, how many people respond, whether people respond at all. Because, as we will see, there's not much chance of that happening. Okay, let's get into the text, and you can stop me as we go, and we may have other questions to ask along the way. Kind of work through here. On your handout, there's kind of two basic sections. I've split it up into a few smaller sections here on the charts. First of all, we should just mention that the phrase that's used almost 100 times, I think, in the book. This is the way that God refers to Ezekiel. He calls him Son of Man. Okay, and as New Testament readers, we hear that language and we immediately think of Jesus and the messianic implications of that phrase. But here in Ezekiel, it just simply means Ezekiel is a human. Okay, I get one Narnia reference, right? What, for the week, for the quarter? You remember when the children show up in Narnia, the Narnians tell them, are you a son of Adam? And they're like, what do you mean, am I a son of Adam? It's like, well, are you a human, right? That's what it means, this Hebrew idiom, son of man, simply means that you're a man, you're a human, okay? Now, I will ask you this. You think there's any significance to this being the phrase that God chooses to use for Ezekiel? Why refer to him over 100 times with a phrase that simply means, hey, human? Put him in his place. And think about that. What has Ezekiel just seen? When the first words out of God's mouth are, hey, human. Ezekiel has just seen something, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God in chapter 1. So I think it is, maybe among other things, a humbling thing. By the way, with this in mind, we probably also will improve our understanding of what Jesus is doing when he refers to himself as Son of Man. He is emphasizing his own humanity, as well as I think also referencing passages like Daniel 7 that use the phrase Son of Man in maybe a little bit of a different way or with a different outcome. Okay, but Ezekiel is Son of Man. That's how God refers to him throughout the book. And he is sent to the sons of Israel. Now remember, when you see the sons of Israel in verse 3 of chapter 2, Ezekiel's not going back to Jerusalem. Okay, the sons of Israel that he's being sent to are those in Babylonian exile. And they are a rebellious house. Did you get that? Did you pick up on the fact that they were rebellious? Like every third word in the first 8 verses in chapter 2 is they're rebellious. They are rebellious. They are a rebellious house. By the way, they're rebellious. Okay? That's who Ezekiel is sent to. And like we've said, he knows that from the get-go. I mean, just imagine being Ezekiel, and you're sent on this mission to proclaim the word of God, and you are told from the front, they're not going to listen to you. They're just going to continue in their rebellion against you. Okay? So what's his goal? What's the point? Is that by the end of it, they'll know that a prophet has been among them. But it's not going to be easy. I don't know exactly what all God means when he says in verse 6 that you will, thorns and thistles are with you, and you will sit on scorpions. Okay? I'm assuming this is figurative language to say that it's going to, they're going to rub you the wrong way. They're going to hurt you. Ezekiel does, in the next chapters, we'll see, have to lie down on his side day after day for like a year. So maybe as he was just laying there, as God commanded him, there were scorpions and thorns and thistles. I don't know. But I think the point is they will attack you with their words. They will be hostile to you. It's going to be very difficult, but do not fear. Verse 7, just speak the words I've given to you to speak, whether they listen or not. Yeah, Mike.
It's not a literal type of situation, because if you look at, excuse me, if you look like right around both of them, and whether they hear or refuse to hear, they will know that a prophet is being, and you, son of man, be not afraid of them. It talks about fear of these briars and thistles and all that stuff, but it talks about speaking on both sides of it. Yeah. So, my opinion, for what it's worth, he's definitely talking about something figurative here that is in a speech sort of situation, making fun of him, belittling him, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And Ezekiel will not, just by way of contrast, experience some of the physical abuse that someone like Jeremiah experienced. But so as to underscore Mike's point of the words, right, that they will. That's part of why I referenced it. We have this like absurd statement about sticks and stones will break my bones, words will never hurt me. It's like, that's rubbish. Like words really do hurt us. Okay. And Ezekiel was going to be in a situation where people were going to be, hurling all sorts of hurtful words at him. But yet, he's told by God, hang in there, okay? I'm giving you the words to speak. Do not fear. I'm with you, okay? The way we think of it, God's not doing a great job of selling Ezekiel on this job. It's not a great job description, okay? It's going to be really hard, thorns and thistles and scorpions, and you're going to speak and no one will listen, okay? But that's what Ezekiel's being told to do. That's the nature of his work, okay? All right, we'll keep going. We'll maybe pause in a minute for other things you want to talk about. Ezekiel is a book. I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but if you're familiar with Ezekiel or read a little bit of it, you may know this. Ezekiel does a lot of weird things in the book. The prophets were called often to do weird things, and Ezekiel seems to be called to do the weirdest of the things of the prophets. And so the first strange thing that Ezekiel is called to do is to eat a book or eat a scroll. More specifically, okay? Now, a few things about this scroll that are we're going to clarify, and then I'll ask you about it, okay? Robert mentioned this earlier, and it's a kind of an odd phrase, but verse 8, he says, don't be rebellious like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I'm giving you, okay? That made me think. I wonder if some of the purpose behind the weird, strange, difficult sign acts, that's what we call them, that Ezekiel is called to do, is that he would literally be showing the people, this is what it looks like to do what God tells you to do. It may be weird, it may be strange, but Ezekiel becomes the model of the person who, when God tells him to do something, he does it, okay? I don't know, maybe I'm making too much of that. Maybe it was just really hard to eat a scroll, and so, God says, don't turn back now, you better eat this scroll. It says that the scrolls are written on front and back, okay? The scrolls were not written on front and back, okay? They didn't do that, okay? So you run on one side of the scroll and it rolls up, and if you need to add to it, you could maybe paste or sew in more leaves or more, papyrus or more parchment to the end of it. But here's a scroll that's written on front and back, meaning there's a lot that God is going to give Ezekiel to say. And what's on that scroll? He says it's lamentations, mourning, and woe. This gets back to where we started. This is going to be the force of Ezekiel's message, a message of judgment. It's not a pleasant message necessarily, lamentations, mourning, and woe. And yet, when Ezekiel eats it, he says it's as sweet as honey. Okay, I do want to hear from you for a minute or two. What comes to mind when you think of this picture of Ezekiel eating the scroll, and maybe some of the details as well, but maybe just the overall picture? What are we supposed to gain from this image of Ezekiel eating the scroll?
As sweet as honey, but what's written on it? Lamentations, mourning, and woe. So, I don't know.
I don't know either.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, passages come to mind like Psalm 19, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. But yeah, maybe when we sing that song or we read that verse, we might think like, well, what verses of the Bible does David think are sweeter than honey? I mean, he's talking about the law and the precepts, so he's like, yeah, Leviticus, man, it goes down sweet as honey. It's just really nice, So maybe there's a lesson in that, and just regardless of what it is, it's God's word. And so it's delightful and pleasant because it's life-giving, is the idea. But probably it's not going to taste so sweet to the people hearing it, but to Ezekiel, it tasted as honey. So, I don't know. Ian, you had something?
Yeah, it makes me think of like, Jesus being the bread of life, and it's and how we interpret that today. It's like we're not going to eat the word, but we are going to consume it, and it's going to feed us. It's going to nourish us spiritually. So that's kind of where my mind goes here. Consume this scroll, make it a part of your inner being, and it will manifest itself in you.
No, I think that's exactly right. And Ian's doing the right thing here, taking us to a number of other Bible passages that describe our filling ourselves with the Word or with the Lord in terms of eating language. And to Ian's point, a little bit later on in our text, in verse 10 of chapter 3, God will say, take into your heart all these words which I will speak to you, and listen closely. So that's just maybe a more straightforward way of commanding Ezekiel to do what he's doing here, which is actually eating the scroll. Okay, but I mean, put this together in terms of Ezekiel's being called as a prophet. First thing he's told is, "You speak my words, even if no one listens." The second thing, fill yourself with my words, eat them, and make them a part of yourself. Okay, but a little bit more that Ezekiel's going to need to do his work. There's this starting in verse 4 of chapter 3. There's this description of the people, that they are not foreigners that won't understand him, or he can't understand them. There's not a language barrier, okay? And I'm kind of maybe adding to that a little bit, if that's appropriate, to say it's not just that God's saying they speak the same language. That's true, but that's also a way of saying there's a familiarity there. Ezekiel is one of them. They are like him. And because of that, they're going to understand what he's saying. Okay? It's not as if he's going to speak and they're going to be like, we don't understand what you're talking about. It just, rationally just doesn't add up. Okay? That's not the problem with the people. Okay? It's not the fact that they can't understand him. Instead, it's a problem of unwillingness. They are unwilling to listen to him. They are stubborn and obstinate. Those two words aren't repeated as much as the word rebellious in these two chapters, but those words are repeated. Okay, that's the real problem here. Okay. By the way, just as an aside, I think that's something we see a lot in Scripture. In fact, it strikes me in the Gospels when Jesus talks to people. We have in mind like the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders that rejected him, but it's true of more people than just that. So often in the Gospels, when Jesus is getting on to people, he's not getting on to them because they're not getting it up here. Okay? It's the fact that they're unwilling in here, that their heart is not soft, humble to receive it. They get it. They understand rationally what it is that Jesus is saying. They just don't want to listen to him. And I think if we're honest, we're probably most of the time in the exact same situation. We don't do the things that we know we're supposed to do because we don't understand. Like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do? That's what that Bible passage means, It's not that. Don't get me wrong. There are times when we get our understanding straightened out and we do see more clearly. Oh, okay, now I understand that. But, 95% of the time, it's not that we don't understand what we're supposed to do. It's just we're unwilling to do it. We're stubborn. We don't like changing our ways. We don't want to give up whatever that God is asking us to give up, or, put forth the effort to do what God's asking us to do. So that's the problem here. Not foreigners, but people that will understand you, and yet still they will reject you because they're stubborn and obstinate. Okay. So what does Ezekiel need? What's it going to take for Ezekiel to overcome, to meet the challenge of stubborn, hard-headed sons of Israel that he's going to be talking to? He needs a stronger head. He needs a head that's harder than theirs, okay? And that's exactly what God tells him he's going to give him. Some translations in verse 9, mine says emery. I don't know what emery is, okay? Some say adamant. I don't really know what that is either. Some translations say diamond, and I know what that is. That's the hardest of the stones, okay? So maybe diamond is the image you want to go with here. But God's going to give him a harder head than the people. I love that. I mean, there's this determination. There's a sense in which stubbornness is or can be a good thing, okay? Stubbornness on its own is perhaps neutral, okay? Perhaps. But a stubbornness for doing the right thing, an obstinacy that says, I'm standing with the Lord and, you can't do anything about it, okay? That's exactly what we should have. And so Ezekiel's going to be hard-headed just like his listeners, in fact, more so, okay? So he needs a harder head than his audience. He needs that word in his heart, which we've mentioned already. And the most important thing he needs is verse 11. He needs the thus says the Lord, to go out and say, this is what God has said. And that's it. That's what Ezekiel's work will consist of. Okay. All right, let's pause here. That's the first section of your handout. So any comments or things you want to ask about or talk about from chapter 2 into chapter 3, verse 11? Yeah, Robert. Yes. Yeah, yeah. And it's not just there. I mean, I'm thinking Isaiah was told the same thing. A couple hundred years earlier, when Isaiah was called, it was they're gonna see, but they're not gonna perceive. They're gonna hear, but they're not gonna understand. Okay, they're unwilling to turn and be healed. But yeah, you're right. That's Deuteronomy, and I appreciate that, Robert. That both things are in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the problem. You're hard-headed and rebellious, and you're going to be judged for it. But Deuteronomy is also the solution. Get the word in your heart. Have it in front of you all the time. Consume it. Make it a part of your existence. Okay, let's continue on then into chapter 3 and verse 12 and following. And verse 12 reminds us that chapter 1 just happened, and apparently that vision is either still going on or is right there at hand. Because verse 12, the Spirit lifted me up. I heard a great rumbling sound behind me. Blessed are the glory of the Lord in his place. I heard the sound of the wings of the living creatures touching one another. So Ezekiel's still in this, or maybe brought back into this vision from chapter 1 with the cherubim and the living creatures and all of that. Okay, and again, this was mentioned earlier. don't disconnect chapters 2 and 3 from chapter 1. Okay, so whatever the timeline is here, the call of Ezekiel in chapters 2 and 3, we're supposed to be seeing it in the light of the glorious vision he saw in chapter 1. Okay, so don't get them separated too much here. Okay, all right. I'm interested in what you think about these next two things here. It says that he was brought in taken away, verse 14, and he went embittered in the rage of his spirit, and the hand of the Lord was strong upon me. What do we think Ezekiel was embittered about, enraged? And maybe there's other words and other translations, but what's up with Ezekiel's emotions here? Why is he embittered in his rage? Albert, what do you think?
Completely suspect, but I mean, God has called him to do some very difficult and challenging, and God is, I can't help but think in the previous verses that God's like, it's going to be hard. I'm going to be there for you, and it's going to be a difficult task, and I can't help but think that he chose Ezekiel for a reason based on his life, upbringing. I don't, know that it was a random person that he chose Ezekiel, to where I can't help but feel personally that he's upset by this whole thing, and that the people have had a pattern, have had a history, and continue on, and he's had this vision, and I just can't help but think he's upset at these people that they're just continuing on.
And that's a pattern we see repeated throughout the Old Testament and New Testament as well. But I mean, all the way back to Moses, right, throwing the tablets, to Jeremiah being so, caught up in his own emotions about the situation. Even Ezra and Nehemiah pulling out either their own beard or other people's beards in their anger over the sin. John, what do you think?
He's consumed the word, and it's part of him. He, if he's acting as God would act, he probably has no other choice. Yeah. But I was also thinking, there's nothing I hate doing more than work that has no productivity. I can't think, that would make me pretty, if I was setting out on a mission like this with productivity not being the goal, that would be disheartening.
Well, and Jeremiah expresses some similar frustration in his book as well, about I'm just not going to talk anymore because they won't listen. And then after a while, it's like it's a fire in his bones. He can't do that. So I think we see legitimate reasons for anger, righteous anger in Ezekiel. And yet, when he gets to the people, and maybe they're all in expectation, what is Ezekiel going to say to us? He doesn't say anything. He sits for 7 days. We'll talk about why, a little bit short on time here, so we'll move on. I think there may be just a nice counter here to what's already been said. So put together the righteous anger, the bitterness, the rage, but yet he takes the time to sit, right? He's not flying off the handle, so to speak. He's sitting with his people, taking some time. There's also a suggestion, notice the question mark here, that because Ezekiel's the priest, remember it's his 30th year, and that's the year that a priest would enter the temple service. There was a 7-day waiting period when a priest was ordained or consecrated, and so it could be that that's another, connection there to Ezekiel's role as a priest or history as the son of a priest. He's waiting his 7 days before he enters into his service. Okay, but here's what I want to talk about. What is a watchman? So before we get to Ezekiel, let's focus on this. In a city, an ancient city with walls and all that. Okay. What is a watchman, and what would a watchman do? Look out on that for what? Yeah, look out for danger. Okay, and when the watchman sees danger ahead, out on the horizon, what's his job? To ring a bell to warn the city. Okay, that's what we need to have in mind here. We need to, not sure what happened there. Robert will get it back in no time here. Yeah, I'll go. Oh, back. That's great. Yeah, right there. Thank you, Robert. Okay, he's looking for danger, and we say you have one job. This is his one job: alert the city of that danger. This is the key thing. And think about a watchman in this context. It is not the watchman's job to organize the army or to set out a strategy or to go and, lead the troops to victory, right? That's not the watchman's job. The watchman has one job. It's alert the city so they know that there's danger ahead. Once you've done that, it's up to the leaders of the city, everyone else to, do what they're going to do, okay? If the city isn't warned, though, so if you do this as a watchman and the city falls, well, you've done what you were called to do. But if the watchman doesn't warn the city and the city falls, then, if he's not already dead, execution would be the punishment, and it would be the blood would be on his head, okay? This is exactly what Ezekiel's job is to do, okay? You warn the people. If you warn them, and there's two scenarios laid out here, but they're essentially the same, okay? Whether it's the wicked person not turning back from his wickedness or the righteous person who starts veering and continues to veer and fall away, either way it's the same. If Ezekiel warns of the danger, then if they perish, they will perish, but it's not on his head. If he doesn't warn them and they perish, then it is on his head. And they'll still perish too, but it's on his head, okay? So again, this gets back to our original conversation. What's Ezekiel's job? Speak the words of the Lord, warn the people of the coming judgment. Now we'll just point this out too, keep this in mind as we go through the book. Ezekiel seems to emphasize individual responsibility, perhaps a little bit more pointedly or more strongly than some of the other prophets or passages in the Old Testament. Individual responsibility is big in this book, and you see that here, right? The people who sin and perish are not off the hook because, well, he didn't tell me. No, each person who sins and turns away is responsible. Ezekiel's responsible. The people are responsible, each one for their own selves, okay? All right, let's maybe skip through this here, the last few verses, because I do want to take, even if it's just a minute or two. What connections would you make? Shout out ideas that you have. Connections from chapters 2 and 3 of Ezekiel to our responsibility to preach, to teach the word, to evangelize. What would you say? Ian?
Kind of in regards to verses 14 and 15, where you see him clearly upset and overwhelmed with what he's been called to do. It's just a lesson for me. There's going to be plenty of times where there's people that I feel like I'm wasting my time speaking to. They're stubborn. I don't have the time or patience. But again, if we just take the time to be patient and trust in the Lord and let him do his thing, and we do our thing, that's the best we could do. But following through with that is our responsibility to be obedient to the Lord. And so I think that's an important lesson to take from the end here.
Great, thank you, Ian. Other thoughts on corollaries to our responsibility? Mike?
There's a saying from a famous sports shoe, just do it. That's really what this is. Really what he's saying here in Ezekiel, and also applies to us in our evangelism, is just say it, because they're my words. If they're rejecting somebody, they're rejecting me. They aren't rejecting you. And that's tough for us as we try to evangelize to comprehend, because we say it's something we're doing. What can I do? What can I say? How can I make this clear? It's not about us. It's about God. All God expects of us, and all he expected of Ezekiel was, just say it, just do it, and let my word be the convincing.
Great. Seems like a great place to end, and the bell rang. So we got to end anyway. Thank you, Mike, for that, and thank you all for your contributions, and we'll pick up in chapter 4 on Sunday. Thank you, guys.